Alan's got problems with his internet. He's trying to connect, but he may have difficulties.
Thank you, Leader.
Chairman, the meeting is now live.
Very good. Thank you very much. And I welcome everybody to the meeting and trust all of you and your families are well. Remind you the meeting is a meeting in public, but not a public meeting, albeit virtual. It has been recorded, as you know, and videoed. I would ask you to ensure that all your electronic devices are muted, mobiles, landlines, etc. And also that every member should be on mute until they're asked to speak. Would the officers at this stage like to introduce themselves, please?
Emma Parks, the Head of Development Management.
Hi, I'm Jason Hawkes, Principal Planning Officer.
Joy Kadike, Legal Services.
Liz DePauli, Democratic Services.
Sharon Evans, the Head of Legal and the Council's Monitoring Officer.
Thank you very much. Would the legal officer care to give her introduction now? Thank you.
Thank you. This is a brief reminder of procedures and behavior during the meeting. Could you please make sure that your mobile phones and other devices are switched to silent if they are in close proximity to you? Everyone is responsible for managing their own microphone by keeping it muted unless unmuting when invited to speak. This includes any roll call vote. Following the presentation and member discussions, members will be asked to vote on each item. The roll call vote is called alphabetically, so to make it as smooth as possible, please could members be poised in readiness to be called and unmute your microphone before you vote and then mute yourself again afterwards. When you wish to speak, you will need to press the blue raise hand icon. To find the blue raised hand icon, please click on the participant icon found on the Zoom toolbar. The toolbar is at the top of an iPad or at the bottom of the screen if you're using a laptop or PC. The list of participants will also appear down one side of the screen. Those with raised hands will move to the top of the list in the order they are pressed. There may be technical issues with connectivity that means you leave the meeting unintentionally. Unfortunately, if this is the case, you will have to abstain on the item that you missed part of. To re-enter the meeting, use the Zoom invitation link. If a councillor has an interest and does not wish to attend part of the meeting, the hosting officer will put them in the waiting room and return them to the meeting when the item is finished. The meeting is live streamed and you will be seen and heard by members of the public, so it's important to behave professionally at all times. There may be a few seconds delay between the end of the meeting and when the live stream and recording are stopped. Some members of the public are making representations by video recording, which will be played at the relevant time, and the members of the public or parish council representatives wishing to participate in the meeting will be held in a waiting room by the host until it is their turn to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Item 1, apologies for absence. Pleased to see Councillor Croker here. Sorry, Liz, do you have any apologies?
Yes, I have apologies from Councillor Liz Kitchen.
Thank you very much. No other apologies. Item 2 are minutes of the previous meeting. May we approve these as correct? Everybody agrees?
Yes,
No
agreed. Agreed.
Thank you very much. And as with our current COVID practice, I will arrange to sign them in due course. Item 3 is declarations of members' interests. As the legal officers know, Councillor Noel was not sure of his position. So Councillor Noel, would you like to advise the meeting of your position, and we'll ask the legal officer to give a view on it?
Thank you, Chairman. I have a declaration of personal interest in relation to item 8, DC 200025. It's only a personal interest in the pure fact that my wife happens to sit on the parish council in which this application is situated. And that's all it is. I would like to speak if possible, and I'd also like to vote. But if I can speak and not vote, that would be good enough. But I would definitely like to say a word or two. So it's up to the monitoring officer to make a decision, please.
Would the legal officers give their view in this matter, please?
Sharon, would you like me to go ahead, or are you happy? Okay. The monitoring officers, I've advised previously that you have to decide if this interest is likely to be seen as prejudicing your impartiality or ability to meet the principles of public life, and vote with an open, as far as you're able to vote with an open mind, then you can proceed with voting and participating in the meeting.
Councillor No?
Thank you very much. Yes, I will declare that I still have an open mind, and although I want to speak, well, you'll hear when I speak, but you'll hear from what I have to say that my mind is open. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Do any other members have declarations of interest? There are no other declarations of interest. Do we have any announcements? The officers have any announcements? I suppose the good news was at 1 o'clock today, whereby we might now be in another 6 months of semi-lockdown. So just as the officers were starting to drag us back to the council, it looks like we're back to square one. Anyway, let's wait and see what happens. Right, that was COVID announcement.
Chairman, could I
Yes.
just say that Councillor Chowan has now said he still can't get in, so could he add his apologies if he fails to over the course of the meeting, please?
Yes, thank you very much. Right, item 5, you have the list of appeals that have been through the books, so to speak. Does anybody have any comments on the appeals? There are no comments on the appeals. We'll thus move on to item 6, which is Threels Farm, Threels Lane, West Chiltington, and I'd ask the officers to kindly introduce the item.
There you go. Sorry about that. I couldn't get off on mute. So we've got 4 items today. So this is the first for Threels Farm. Here we see the location plan. The site is within the parish of Thegum and lies adjacent to the southeast boundary of West Chiltington. The site currently comprises large redundant agricultural buildings, as you can see here within the red line, and is nearby to residential properties, including Threels Barn to the north and properties at West Chiltington. Right-of-way runs directly adjacent to the site down to Threels Lane. Here we see an aerial photo of the site, and you can see the large barns on site. There's a photo of one of the barns, and here we have another photo of the site with the barns. So the proposal today is the demolition of the barns and the construction of 5 dwellings on site, as shown here on the proposed location block plan. You can see the site is divided into 5 plots with houses in a farmstead layout, utilising the existing access. This plan also shows the proposed landscaping, which includes the addition of 22 trees. The proposal is for 2 4-bed units and 3 5-bed units. So here we see the proposed elevations of plots 1 and 2, 2 houses to the south, which are joined. They can see that they're in a traditional farmstead appearance. Here's the appearance of another one of the houses, which is plot 4. And this has the appearance of a converted barn. And here with the appearance of plot 5, which has this more traditional farmhouse appearance. This application is not within a built-up area boundary and therefore classed as a departure from the local plan. The proposal has been put forward for approval on the basis that there is a fallback provision for housing on the site, and this is given significant weight in the recommendation for approval. The fallback is a prior approval which has been granted for the conversion of the large barn on site for 5 dwellings, and this was granted in 2019. You can see the approved layout here with the barn highlighted in black and the proposed floor plan of the barn there on here. And here we see the proposed elevations and an artist's impression of the prior approval for the conversion of the barn. As detailed in the report, the current proposal for 5 separate dwellings on site is considered a better development than the fallback position of the conversion of the barn. The current scheme would improve the appearance of the site with the demolition of all the barns and is of a higher standard and more appropriate development for this site. The scheme is also appropriate in relation to other matters such as highway impact and ecology. The proposal is therefore recommended for approval subject to a Section 1C agreement as highlighted in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 3 speakers from the public. They're all videos. Could we please have the first one from Anthony James?
Honourable members, we have owned the farm building since 1954. Up until 1991, it was run as a dairy farm. The dairy use ceased following an enforcement notice from Southern Water requiring substantive upgrades. The farm was subsequently began growing cereal as an alternative, and all grain storage was moved to modern facilities in Ford. Historically, we've had 4 agricultural tenants using the buildings. 2 of the tenants were unlawfully using the buildings for other commercial uses, and all 4 tenants at some point failed to satisfy rent demands, leaving debts behind in the buildings and heavy disrepair. The site also has a strong history of fly tipping, as well as travellers seeking use. We have been seeking alternative uses for the buildings for a very long time and have made several applications over the years to regenerate the site and put it into a viable use. We have the benefit of a Class Q consent to convert one of the barns into 5 residential dwellings, but that still leaves several other buildings without a solution. We prefer not to take a piecemeal approach by converting part of the site into residential use and other parts into a form of commercial use. The Class Q consent also makes way for a highly unattractive quasi-commercial, quasi-residential shed that looks like it's a forced attempt to reuse a building for the sake of reusing a building versus the introduction of high-quality design. We presented an original scheme to Thacombe Parish as part of the application. The scheme was designed such that it would marry well to the adjoining West Chiltington character. The feedback was very much focused on the scheme being too urban and not embracing the agricultural history of the site. After taking all points on board and in consultation with the planning officer, we agreed to redesign the scheme into a traditional farmstead. We presented the new scheme to Thacombe and it was a far better reaction, with only 1 person stating the scheme was not a visual improvement. We strongly feel that the current proposal leaves behind the best viable solution for the site and makes good use of something that's been an eyesore for far too long. Thank you for your time.
Thank you to the applicant, Anthony James. Could we now please have the agent, Claire Bartlett? Thank you.
Good afternoon. The scheme is presented as an improvement on the Class Q consent, which allows for the conversion of a large redundant agricultural building into 5 houses. As the Class Q scheme was granted by way of the prior approval process, the ability to secure the optimum scheme for the site was limited to the provisions of the General Permitted Development Order. The scheme now proposed has been designed by a local architect in consultation with an ecologist and landscape designer to ensure the best scheme is designed for the site and wider area. The application proposes the demolition of all buildings on the site and the erection of 5 high-quality houses designed and arranged in a traditional farmstead style to reflect the agricultural history of the site. This equates to a very low density of 6 dwellings per hectare. The scheme offers a number of planning merits and advantages over the Class Q scheme. It provides a solution for the entire site, removing all dilapidated farm buildings which have lain redundant for many years and are rapidly becoming an eyesore. It results in a reduction of nearly 600 square metres of built form and the removal of a large area of hard standing, which currently covers most of the site. Also a significant reduction in volume and massing in comparison with the existing large agricultural sheds. The scheme uses high quality and more energy efficient materials such as local Sussex limestone and handmade Sussex clay bricks on the houses, Oak-framed carports with Sussex clay roof tiles are proposed to screen cars from view. Biodiversity enhancements are proposed to enhance the site suitability for protected and notable species, and a landscaping scheme proposes the planting of native hedgerow and 28 new trees. Overall, the scheme has been assessed as having a major to moderate beneficial effect on landscape and visual amenity. Overall, the submitted scheme is considered to be a significant improvement on the consented Class Q scheme. Optimum siting, bespoke design that uses high quality materials and offers landscaping and biodiversity improvements are considered to weigh significantly in the scheme's favour.
Thank you. Now I have Owen Richards from Thacon Parish Council, who's objecting to it. Being a parish council, it'll be 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thacon Parish Council strongly objects to this proposal. The parish did not object to the 2019 Class Q proposal to convert one barn on this site into 5 modest dwellings due to limited landscape impact and as the properties created would meet local housing needs. That consent is the fallback option. The site has previously been subject to several applications seeking to demolish existing barns and replace with large detached dwellings. The last, DC 152420, was opposed by both Thacon and West Chiltington Parish Councils and refused by HDC on the grounds the site is outside the built area boundary, is not allocated for development, is not essential to the countryside location and is unsustainable. A 2018 application for a 4-bed house next door to the site was refused on the same grounds. All that has changed since those refusals is the Class Q consent. Other points of context. The PC considers the size of the new proposal to be too large to be considered windfall, nor can the site be considered infill, as it is not a natural extension of the nearby West Chiltington built-up area boundary and will create a substantial suburban intrusion into the green gap between the two parishes. The red line area of the existing consent contains a single barn building and does not imply housing use for the whole of the barn complex area, as suggested. The officer report confirms this. So the proposal's emphasis on efficient use of the full site has no planning force. The parish has carefully reviewed the relative merits and impacts of the two schemes. In relation to design quality, we see good reasons to favour the consented scheme. The conversion design is not uninteresting or unattractive and allows the building to continue to be read as a former barn, whereas the revised scheme is a suburban intrusion in a confected pseudo-farmyard style bearing no relation to the surroundings or local vernacular. The new scheme will badly harm local landscape views from two well-used rights of way. The proposed large footprint of the site, 20% larger than existing barn structures, cannot be screened from view. Footpath 2463 running south of the site currently has a northward view that is entirely rural without dwellings, which is enjoyed by guests of the specialist walking holiday hotel at Abingworth Hall just east of the site. Environmentally, while both schemes may achieve similar post-occupation energy performance, CO2 emissions released by demolishing all existing barn structures will be very high, which is not necessarily the case with the conversion scheme. Enhanced biodiversity claims of the new scheme are greatly offset by the larger footprint and the impact of more people and vehicles. The barn conversion comprises 12 bedrooms and 10 vehicles. The new scheme count is 20 bedrooms and 20 cars. In terms of housing need, the consented scheme would create smaller dwellings of a type in great demand but short supply locally, whereas the area has a glut of 3 to 5 bed new builds, including at the large Abingworth development. HDC's emerging local plan accepts that the key need is for smaller properties. Regarding the affordable contribution, a single unit elsewhere in the district is of no benefit to local residents. Hence, the conversion scheme is better aligned to local needs. In conclusion, all the reasons for HDC refusing past similar schemes here remain applicable. It conflicts with multiple HDPF policies and Thacon Neighbourhood Plan Policies 1 and 9, which only supports conversions in the countryside that are confined to the existing area of farm buildings and do not result in an increase in existing building footprint. The only basis for favouring the demolish and rebuild scheme over the existing consented scheme is if the new scheme on all key planning criteria. Finally, should this proposal be approved, the PC flags that it's requested community benefits relating to rights of way and affordable housing. The former to comprise a significant contribution to upgrading Bridleway 2791 adjacent to the site, and also permissive improvements to footpath 2463 southeast of the site. We've also asked the affordable contribution to be approved from 1 unit at an unspecified location to 2 units delivered within Fakenham or West Chiltern. The officer report recommends that the rights of way request be taken forward in S106 discussions, but does not mention enhanced affordable housing. So we ask the scope of any S106 discussion should be clarified. Thank you.
Thank you. Do the officers wish to comment at this stage?
Yeah, if I can come in. With the affordable housing, with the changes that the government brought in, we can only request affordable housing contributions or on-site delivery for 10 units or more. So this is for 5 units. So unfortunately, we can't insist on any kind of contribution or affordable housing provision here. With the climate change and diversity, that's outlined in the report, and we feel that there are benefits here. They've done the biodiversity enhancement schemes, and there's going to be, and that's going to be conditioned. And there's also climate change is addressed here in the reports with the EV charging points. So I think it's really, there is a matter of difference of opinion here. We think that this is a better use of the site. If you do have that barn retained on site, there's a possibility that the other uses, other barns could come back into commercial use. And so we think this is a better use of the site to have 5 dwellings here. And we take the point that there was houses nearby that had been refused, but they didn't benefit from prior approval. So as council's aware, we've had many applications here where we had to have given that significant weight, which is what we're doing here. But we also take into account the visual impact, and we think that this is a better scheme than what was being put forward under the prior approval. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to the 3 ward members. Councillor Blackhole.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I would recommend that the committee approves this application for the following reasons. As you can see, it's an absolute eyesore at the moment, subject to bits of fly tipping and various things like this going on. I also feel that there is a demand for property like this in this area, living not very far away from this. I can say from my personal, where I live, properties like this are selling rapidly, and there's hardly a week goes past without a local estate agent contacting me saying, if you want to sell your house, we can sell it, we get X price more for this. So I do feel that this is a way of getting rid of a redundant farm enterprise and the buildings with a desirable development. I'm also influenced by the fact that recently I had a delightful few days up in Cumbria and North Lancashire. And the one in Cumbria was quite interesting, that this is in Storrs Park, not only in a national park, but in a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And there they had granted permission for a property to be redeveloped by somebody who had paid over £1 million for this, to be pulled down, to be redeveloped so that they could have not only an indoor swimming pool, but a heliport. The reason being that the whole development in Storrs Park in Windermere there was very much done during the Victorian era by mill owners from Lancashire, and built for them. And the argument was that we shouldn't restrict entrepreneurs today by having property of a suitable quality. And I also then moved on to North Lancashire. And again, there was farm buildings like this. It was an area I know quite well from the years I lived up there. And they had I think, follow the national policy on redeveloping agricultural buildings and this. And here, they may have the advantage that it's the aristocracy that owns it by and large around there. Either it's the Duchy of Lancaster, which is the Queen, or it's the Duke of Westminster, or it's the Parker family of Brewsome Hall, who have been there since 1507. And I was delighted that when I drove around there, that farm complexes which had been nearly derelict when I lived there have all now been restored in a theme which is not too dissimilar from what this scheme is. So I do feel that we should approve this for these reasons. And I do feel that at the moment, the other lessons from Lancashire was that, with redundant buildings, and that we should look at these things, because I'm sure that what's happened up there with the textile industry and the demise of it is going to happen here in a much shorter space of time with the demise of, we're going to be faced with what do we do with airports and control towers and all the rest of the thing. And that up there, a couple of examples, a mill I know well in Clitheroe has been converted into a boutique hotel. And where the engine room was, the engine is still there, and it's now the bar reception area, done very well. And I turned to where I used to work in Darwin, and there you have the example of a 5-story textile mill, the India Mill, closed in the 1990s and being redeveloped into a complex now of various business enterprises. And there they've, the only complaint from the locals is that it now employs 800 or 900 people there. Even in its textile mills days, at its height, it was only about 200 or 300. And the big problem is, locals tell me, is that there's too much parking on Bolton Road because it's so successful. And I think it's this type of thinking that, especially in the current climate, that we need to look at. So I would strongly recommend that we tidy up this area, meet what it depends on what we talk about local needs, but there's certainly a demand commercially for properties of this type. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Right, could we have the Rubbish Cabinet Member, Councillor Circus, please?
You enjoyed saying that, didn't you, Chairman? I, up to a point, I agree with what my colleague, Councillor Blackhole, has said. This will clear up a site that is not exactly attractive. We actually looked at a property on the West Chiltington side of Threels Lane years and years ago, and one of the reasons we didn't buy the property was the unsightly nature and appearance of the other side of the road, which definitely could do with to be improved, because, as members need to know, the boundary between the West Chiltington parish and Thacombe parish effectively runs down the middle of the road. It is true that these properties will probably reflect very well and be consistent very well with the West Chiltington side of the road, if I can put it like that. But as lawyers tend to say, hard cases make bad law. Whilst I can see the argument that this will improve this particular site, we have heard we've heard a very clear explanation from the clerk to Thacombe Parish Council that this is how much that this is contrary to policy, how it has the potential to start eking away at the green gap between the two parishes, and also the fact that it is contrary to the Thacombe neighbourhood plan, because we are, remember, this is within the Thacombe parish, not within the West Chiltington parish. And we've made the point many times that Thacombe in terms of development, have taken proportionately more than any other community, including Horsham, in recent times. So they've certainly taken more than their share of new house building. I find it difficult, Chairman, to come to these meetings regularly and say that we should encourage local parishes in their pursuit of neighbourhood plans, that despite their doubts that may have crept in, may creep in even further with changes on the planning front, that nevertheless they should persevere with neighbourhood plans. They are important for the communities that they serve. And I think it would be inappropriate of me to say that because this will, in a very specific context, will improve the appearance of a particular site, that therefore we should disregard the wider implications of this for Thacombe as a parish and for Thacomb's neighbourhood plan. So I not with a huge amount of pleasure, but nevertheless, because I think we have to take the broader view of these things, my view is we should support the parish council and we should not approve this application this afternoon. Thank you. Yes, we shouldn't not approve this application this afternoon. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I don't know if we've got the third member of this ward present, Councillor Saeed. I can't see him in the list.
No, he's not present.
Right, we'll then go to the members, starting with Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. I've listened carefully to what Councillor Blackhole and Councillor Circus are saying. I just wanted, as a farmer and a young farmer as that, just to say that I think the fact that agricultural activity at that site, the owner is saying is not profitable, is not a reason to grant an application. Councillor Blackhole is right that, you know, around the country we are seeing more and more farmyards like this that once provided an income for a family, that once were a step on the ladder for a young farmer like myself, are now being turned into housing because it's an easy route, as it were, for people to sort of apply for planning. And I personally don't think that is a reason to give permission. So I think we need to be careful when doing that, particularly as it will set a precedent. My own farmyard is much uglier than this farmyard, and it is profitable. So I do struggle slightly with that argument. I can see Councillor Potts is going to talk as the other farmer in here. So that would be my only comment. I am minded to agree with the parish council in this, so I won't be voting for this.
Gosh, fascinating that some farmyards are uglier than others. Right, Councillor Potts.
Thank you, Chairman. Really just a question for the officers. I'm not going to say anything specifically about farming. It's more about the fallback position, because in this instance there seems to be little evidence to suggest a real intent to develop as per the initial Class Q consent. And as such, can a fallback position be realistically applied? I mean, we know this is a common ploy, or often is a common ploy, to circumvent the planning rules. So should greater emphasis not be put on an initial intent, or needed to establish an initial intent to build following Class Q approval?
Thank you. Councillor Lloyd, and then we'll have the head of planning. Councillor Lloyd.
Thank you, Chair. I'm mindful of the comments made by both the local members, and I must confess that I do agree with Councillor Circus regarding the neighbourhood plan process that we quite often ignore when we're making decisions of this type. I'm also listened to the objection from Thacombe. The development is not essential for the countryside location, and also that it's not sustainable. I also feel that an opportunity has been lost because I don't personally, and I've said this before, I know design is a subjective thing, the designs are outstanding and innovative. I think too much has been put into the design to make it rural-like and barn-like when there were other opportunities there. In my view, the houses are very suburban, and therefore I have some sympathy with Thakum's comments about that. However, we are faced with the fallback position, and again, in my view, the fallback position, which has got planning application, is even less attractive than this, and therefore, from my point of view, I will support this application. Thank you, Chair.
Right, we're going to call in the speaking now. After we'll hear Councillor Vickers, Head of Development, allow Councillor Blackhole as a local member to have a brief last go, and then in need Officer Hawkes. So we'll go to the Cabinet Member for Planning, Councillor Vickers.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. These fallback applications always seem to cause concern for members, and I understand those concerns. However, the decision here is whether the fallback position is more or less attractive than the application that's before us. The Class Q consents are a material consideration, and they do carry a significant weight, as the planning officer has explained. I think the wider area solution tidies up the site, but that in itself is not a reason to support it. The reason to support it is the benefits that the current application has above the fallback position. So for that reason, I will be supporting the recommendation to approve. Thank you.
Thank you. Head of Development, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment and answer some of the questions which have been raised by councillors. Councillor Wright made reference to the profitability or not of the farming enterprise. And whilst I don't disagree with those comments, we have to bear in mind that the permitted development regime, the prior approval, does not allow the council to consider the loss of the business when we consider whether or not a prior approval is acceptable. So the government have effectively allowed that to happen, and the prior approval has been granted. It's effectively a tick box enterprise. Does it meet those criteria? And if it does, the council has no option but to grant it. And in granting that, that provides effective fallback position, which, in response to Councillor Potts' question, they have a period of time in which to implement the prior approval, and if that remains live, then effectively case law has established that there is an intent to implement that, and therefore it's a material consideration of significant weight. In terms of the neighbourhood plan, the report acknowledges that, you know, this development is a departure, and therefore effectively it's a departure also from the neighbourhood plan. And the main reason for that is they both, the HCPF and the neighbourhood plan, carry policies of restraint against development in the countryside, but the NPPF dictates that we have to make decisions in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And that, in this case, and as members will be aware, in many cases, is where there's a fallback, where effectively 5 units of residential accommodation have already been established on the site. That will happen, you know, either through the prior approval or through this permission. And the key consideration is, what are the differences, and does this scheme offer an improvement? And the officer's view is that it does. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now have a brief comment from Councillor Blackhole.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to say that, in really Councillor's right point, this has not been used as a farm. It hasn't been a going concern for at least the last 8 or 9 years. So we are talking of a redundant building, which is a complete eyesore. And I believe the new development will be a great improvement in what is quite a beautiful part of the land. Thank you.
Would Officer Hawkes wish to comment before we go to the vote? Perhaps talk about the fallback position.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I've been here for 4.5 years, and ever since I've been here, they've always struggled with this site to find something to do with it. So that's my opinion. They just always struggle to try and make this site work. So, and that is going to continue to be the case, in my opinion. They've constantly trying to do something with it, and they really struggle. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Would you like to comment on the fallback situation, how it does limit our options?
Well, it has to be given weight. We are in a, as Emma said, we take the position that we won't allow development in the countryside, but national planning policy allows there to be departures from that, subject to the criteria. And as the council is aware, we have the prior approval is a situation where that is a departure. So whether we like it or not, we have to give that weight, I'm afraid. So that is what we've done in this case. But also we've looked at the visual impact of this scheme, which we feel is a better use of the site. They are large houses, but they're more in the context of West Chiltington, which is more appropriate. And we feel the farmstead appearance with the landscaping is suitable and better suited than the existing buildings, which are more than likely going to remain redundant.
Thank you. Could Democratic Services now do the roll call vis-a-vis the vote? And I do remind you that the recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to appropriate conditions and a S106 agreement, etc. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor John Blackhole.
For.
Councillor Philip Circus.
Against.
Councillor Paul Clark.
For.
Michael Croker.
Against.
Ray Daw.
For.
Brian Donnelly.
For.
Nigel Jupp.
For.
Lynn Lambert.
For.
Tim Lloyd.
For.
Mike Morgan.
For.
Roger Noel.
For.
Bob Platt. Councillor Platt. Maybe he's left. Oh, again, thank you. Josh Potts. Councillor Potts. I'll come back to Councillor Potts. Thank you. Kate Rowbottom.
For.
Jim Sanson.
For.
Diana Vanderkloot.
Against.
Claire Vickers.
For.
James Wright.
Against.
That's 13 votes in favour of the recommendation and 5 votes against. So the motion is carried.
Great. Thank you. Motion carried. We'll now move on to agenda item 7. If the officers could kindly lead on it, please.
Okay, bear with me. Okay, right, so this next application is for Hill Farm Lane, Cotmore Hill. Before I start, I have a few updates. There was 2 objections to the scheme, and one of those objections has now been withdrawn. We've also received a consultation from the South Downs National Park, which I'll just summarise you. So South Downs National Park have commented, the development site is located outside the National Park, approximately 1 kilometre east of the National Park boundary. Development would likely be visible from the way path, which follows the National Park boundary, as the intervening land has limited vegetation cover of tree stands, and the form is relatively flat and open. However, it would be sited alongside pre-existing agricultural and equestrian development, and as a result, it is considered that any impacts on the setting of the national park would be minor. The SDNP makes no comment on the principle, would recommend that a consideration is given to the International Dark Skies Reserve, which is a special quality of the park. So taking that into consideration, we are recommending an additional condition requiring a lighting condition to be submitted prior to occupation of the developments. We're also recommending an informative to state that the proposal may result in the need to divert the public right of way, which would require a separate consent. So I hope that's clear. We've got the additional condition for the lighting, which addresses the dark skies impact, and we've got an informative which relates to the possibility of diverting the public right of way. Okay.
Thank you. We have one speaker.
Hold on, sorry, I'm not finished yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was just the introduction. Okay. So, proposal is for the construction of livery stables with groom accommodation above, a machinery store, horse walker, and a parking area and an access track. Here we see the location plan in red with the existing access. Site relates to a parcel of land located east of Codmore Hill to the north of Pulborough. Oops, sorry. It's located to the south of existing agricultural buildings, which you can see here. And that includes 2 listed buildings, which are shown here with the red stars. There is also a right-of-way which cuts across the site, which I've shown here in the purple line. Okay. So here we see an aerial view of the site and the existing barns. This photo shows the position of the new stables set against the backdrop of the existing barn. I think this photo is important, in my view, to show the context in which you'll view this proposal, which will be against the backdrop of this existing barn. So here we see the proposed block plan. This shows the new access track leading to a new car park, a stable building, storage barns, and a horse walker. The proposal is for the benefit of Coomlands Equestrian Centre, who are an established business, currently use the site for cross-country school courses, show jumping schooling, all-weather gallops, and dressage arenas. And this proposal will help the centre expand its business. So here we see the elevations of the proposed livery stables, which include grooms accommodation to the upper floors. So whilst it's a big building, it is a traditional design, and it's considered appropriate in this setting, especially taking the context of the existing barn structure to the immediate north. So here's the floor plan of the barns, which shows all the stalls and trap rooms, etc. And these are the ancillary buildings for the horse walker and tractor barn. And finally, this shows an artist's impression of the proposal. And here you can see that clearly the building set against the backdrop of the existing barn, which I mentioned. As part of the proposal, we have consulted the agricultural consultants, RNC. They've commented that they're satisfied that this development will meet the needs of the Coomlands Equestrian Centre and the business is financially stable in the long term. They accept that the buildings proposed are a scale appropriate to support the business going forward. Overall, there are no objections in terms of the visual impacts, the highways impact, amenity, and ecology. Additionally, we feel in the position proposed and on balance, the heritage impact on the listed buildings is acceptable. Therefore, it's recommended, subject to the conditions set out and also to the additional conformity of the right of way and the additional lighting condition I mentioned earlier. Sorry, yeah, so now I'm finished. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Right, now we'll invite the architect from this project, Victoria Holland, to speak for 2 minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Victoria Holland and I should like to provide some background information in support of our planning application for livery facilities at Coomlands Equestrian. This centre, which has been successfully developed by our client and his late partner over the last 10 years, is now recognised as one of the most successful equestrian schooling facilities in the south. It currently provides an all-weather arena, a cross-country course and dressage arena. In recent years, however, its potential has been hampered by lack of stabling and hard standing, which has meant that events have had to be cancelled in poor weather. This scheme, therefore, will allow horses to be stabled on site and cared for by a resident groom. All supporting facilities will also be provided for on site, and these will include a tack room, feed stores, a solarium, and horse wash, hay store, and a machinery store. We have used our equestrian design experience to produce a building and layout which will sit comfortably within the landscape, and it has been specifically designed to conceal and reduce the impact of the incongruous bulk of the agricultural structure to the north. We have used a traditional form with a central brick-built core, a central clock tower, and horizontal timber cladding to the stable elements. We have worked closely with Horsham District Council and their consultants, including the Highways Authority, Conservation Officer and Agricultural Consultant. Not only will the enhanced facilities provide a much needed boost to the rural economy in these uncertain times, but also a continuation of the ongoing relationship which Coomlands maintains with the Brinsbury Agricultural College. As a result, we feel privileged to have produced a scheme which for many years our client and his late partner had worked hard to formulate, and which will form a fitting legacy to her life's work and dedication to the horse world.
Thank you, Ms. Holland. Do officers wish to make any comments at this stage?
I'm sorry, I saw there was a question about the right-of-way informative. I said earlier, there's a right-of-way which does cut across part of the site to the west, and there's a possibility that the horse walker that they're proposing will require the right-of-way to be slightly diverted. So the informative to inform the applicant that they may need a separate application to apply for that right-of-way diversion. As the councillors know, there is a separate approval required for that, which goes through the county. So I hope that's clear.
Thank you. Right, we'll now go to the ward members, and we'll start with Cabinet Member Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Jason, for replying about the right-of-way informative. Normally, this sort of application might be very attractive to quote two items. One is the proposed building itself, which is very pretty attractive, and the other one, wearing an economic development hat, is the possibility of adding employment in the district. Unfortunately, the application, in my view, does not meet a number of other criteria that one might consider around it, and there are omissions in the report, one of which has now been plugged since I read the report, which with the South Downs National Park having made its comments. My first issue is with the building itself, but more to the point, its bulk and size. It's very big. If you look at the building from left to right, as you're looking north, it is proposed to have a horse walker, which is, as the officer pointed out, it's 16 plus 5 meters from the boundary, then a tractor shed, and then a U-shaped building extending 33 to 36 meters to the south in the forms of the legs of a U, if you want. Now, in the immediate vicinity of this building are both footpaths 1995 north-south and 1996 east-west. Both of the paths are extensively used by ramblers, dog walkers, etc., and the use of these footpaths has been especially high during lockdown this past summer, and of course at weekends. This development, therefore, is going to put pressure on the amenity of walkers and ramblers, because effectively it's invading the space, so to speak, in inverted commas, of users of the path, and is a substantial impact to the amenity of the footpath user. I measured them out within reason, and the horse walker comes to about a meter from the footpath, and therefore could be considered to infringe on it. The second problem is the left-hand arm of the U of the building, which comes even closer to the path if you measure it, because I did. According to the plans, there is an exit from the left-hand arm straight onto the footpath, leading to possible confrontations between different users of the land. Now, a mix of horses and dogs can and does lead to problems, and dogs will bark and spook the horses. Not all of them, but it will be a problem. And as I said, I'm surprised officers didn't consult West Sussex County Council PROW officers, as they did in the preceding application. I think that clearly paragraphs 6.34, 0.35 and 0.36 sort of gloss over the picture and the practicalities of sharing the use of land and preserving the amenity of the footpaths. People also spook horses, especially highly strung ones like racehorses and some of these more thoroughbreds. There have been numerous incidents on these gallops of racing horses or competitive horses for cross-country being upset by dogs and people and vice versa, and words have been exchanged between jockeys and members of the public. At these times, these events are rare, as the racehorses tend to use a different piece of land, affecting mostly footpath 1995. But dog walkers are aware of that use and therefore try and do the best that they can. However, the increased use of the land and the intensification of the activity are likely to lead to more major issues, especially as in the write-up of the applicant, The horse walker could be left unattended whilst in use, and this is a clear breach of policy 33. So therefore, this is one of the issues with the site. The South Downs have not proposed any objections in terms of sight lines. So the only comment I would make from the South Downs National Park point of view, not wishing to put words in their mouths, is if one looks at the building site or the look of the building, it's got skylights in the roof, which is going to increase quite sizably the dark sky the dark sky policy of the South Downs National Park, being quite close to South Downs National Park. Be quite a big pool of light. The report downplays the harm to the listed buildings. In the conservation paragraph 3.3, the report writer makes no conclusion after saying it will harm the listed buildings, but it might be offset some of the damage from the at-cost barns. Said paragraph refers to para 196 of the NPPF, where it stated public benefit should outweigh harm, and then para 6.21 in the report reads quite differently, though still referring to paragraph 196. The discussion in the paper between 6.22 and 6.28 therefore comes down in favour of development. I do agree. The architect's design makes a very pretty plan and is very attractive to the eye, possibly in somewhere like the bluegrass area in Kentucky in the United States. I find it rather more difficult to accept that sort of concept in the depths of West Sussex, but it's a question of taste. The outcost barns are weathered and therefore the colours are integrated into the landscape. So I do have some concerns about the materials of use. So I note in the conditions, there will be consultations about the materials being used. I think it should be done in coordination with the local members if this is approved, because colours fade. Therefore, the first point, there's a harm from amenity, and in conjunction with the harm under paragraph 196 of the NPPF, I don't see that the public benefits of this meet the test of para 196, nor of our policies 32 and 33. I would also add at this stage that the application only meets some of our own policy 29, as it does not integrate into any bridleways or any other such network. The third and practical problem is the car park proposed by the applicants and issues under the highways paragraph. At this time, when there is a big event up there are 150 plus horses taking part. So it's not just an issue of 36 vehicles as in para 6.4, but 150 to 200 vehicles through the day coming and going. These sort of events take place nearly every weekend in the summer, and often in the week there are events, though less so in the winter. So the impression given by the report and the paperwork is somewhat misleading. The issue is that the proposed site serves as car parking, I use car parking in a loose sense of the term, for very large horse transporters, in particular those with side drop ramps. Now, any of you who know anything about horse transportation know that you can either get horse boxes where the horse is loaded in from the rear, or in many cases with the medium to larger size ones, they're loaded on and off from the side. So you need particularly wide places to park to do this. Now, horse boxes are 6 to 10 meters in length. For your reference, a bin lorry is 13 meters. So that gives you an idea of the size of the vehicles that we're talking about. So is 6 to 10 meters, a standard horse box trailer plus car or Land Rover. A 2-horse trailer and large towing car are 8 to 9 meters long. For many of these events, there's multi-horse transporters that are arriving that are 10 meters in length. There is no parking provision for those sort of vehicles in this proposal at all. Both the smaller horse boxes and larger ones often discharge sideways, as I said, and not through the rear. The application looks at the traffic link to the application. Okay, I get that. But the issue is that the area that is being built in is already serving as a car park for events that are taking place on this facility. The intention is to grow this business and to make it more popular and make it more, I suppose, profitable. But the problem is that we're taking away a large area of parking for large vehicles, and we're not providing any parking to make up for that use. Also, if you look at the design of the car park itself, we study in great detail how our bin lorries come in and out of developments and locations. None of this work appears to have been done to simulate how the car park would function in parking terms with large vehicles. I know I have enough problems reversing a car with a trailer. Now, horsey folk are probably a lot better than me, but it's not easy to reverse with horse trailers and equipment like that in a narrow car park. So the parking proposals in my
Mr. Clark, can you start closing, please?
Parking is inadequate. The plans talk of 30 spaces and 6 box spaces, 3.3 meters by 6 meters and 3.8 meters. So the plan breaches policy 10 and 41 of the HDPF and item 8 of policy 33, stating the need for a convenient, safe and visually attractive area to park vehicles. So for that reason, I would recommend rejecting the application, or if not, delaying it to cover the items and loopholes in this report. Thank you, Chairman.
Would officers like to respond to Councillor Clark's points at this time? Apparently not.
Right. Sorry, Councillor Donnelly. Obviously, Councillor Clark has highlighted a number of concerns that he has. Some of that relates to matters of assessment in terms of the scale and bulk. Is it acceptable within its context? Obviously, we do allow equestrian facilities in the countryside, and in the context of the buildings already there, officers consider it acceptable. That there are some matters which Councillor Clark has raised that if it was the view of committee, perhaps they are matters that we could seek further information on, such as comments from the Public Rights of Way officer, the impact, the further consideration of the comments from the South Downs in terms of any lighting. So they are matters that perhaps could either be addressed through a deferral or through a delegated approval. Obviously, you have a detailed report in front of you from officers who consider the scheme is acceptable in the context of where it sits and the fact that equestrian development in the countryside is acceptable. And in terms of impact on listed buildings, that there is an impact, but officers are of the view that the benefits of the scheme in terms of the rural economy, etc., outweigh the limited harm that is caused. But obviously that those decisions rest with members of committee. One final point in terms of vehicles, obviously if that was a concern of committee, that's something we could address either through a condition or a deferral in terms of tracking and perhaps additional parking if that were considered an issue that members wanted to pursue. Thank you.
Ward Member Councillor van der Kloeg.
Thank you, Chairman. I very much support many of the all the concerns that have been raised by Councillor Clark. I think these are, I was concerned about the fact there hadn't been consultation with the South Downs National Park, but that has now been dealt with, and they say the impact they consider would be minor. But there is still, I think, a problem with the effect on the dark night skies, their policy of having conditions which reduce the lighting. And I believe that that's been proposed as a condition by the officer. And the other more aesthetic point is the fact that the conservation officer does consider that there will be harm to the wider setting of the listed buildings. And although he considers that that harm would be less than substantial, but he does say that it is a decision for this committee to decide whether the public benefit outweighs that harm. It is our decision. The public benefit seems to comprise the fact that there will be some employment for local people. It's a bit unclear how many people, maybe one or two full-time members of staff and perhaps a few part-time members of staff. And the other public benefit that's put forward by the applicant is that this building, when you view it from the south, would hide the farm buildings which are presently there, which are on a neighbouring land. But I'm not entirely convinced of that, because the farm buildings are of a colour and style which blend into the background, whereas this building could well stand out. So those are 2 points. Coming on to the more practical points, which I think are possibly even more serious, is first of all the parking problem that Councillor Clark dealt with, which basically is the site where the buildings are to be built, the stables are to be built, is currently used for parking of the big horse vehicles and their towing cars. And if the stables and the horse walker are to be built there, which is where it is proposed, that will take up a third of the parking space, and there will be nowhere for the big horse boxes to go. There is going to be a car park constructed in a different area, but that is to deal with the stables and the parking that's required for the stables. So what is going to happen is there's going to be a lot of very, very big vehicles, horse boxes and the towing vehicles, that are going to be displaced, and there will be nowhere for them to go. The second practical problem, which I think is quite serious, is the effect of the development of the proposed buildings on the public right of way, which we're talking about the one which is numbered 1996. Now, this is a very strange right of way in that it goes diagonally across the field where the building is to take place, which is very unusual. Normally you'd expect it to go around the edge. And so, as Councillor Clark explained, the buildings will encroach right up to the public right of way. And they not only will encroach on it, but because they are so immense, they will tower over it. I think the stables are going to be 9 or 10 meters high. And the horse walker is 3.5 meters high. And they will be very close to the public right of way and affect the amenity. And there has been no consultation with the public right of way authority, and that really concerns me. There was mentioned by the officer in his introduction of a possible diversion of the right of way, but I know from experience that that is something that's actually quite difficult to achieve, and it's not necessarily the solution here. And the final practical problem, which I don't think Councillor Clark mentioned, but which does concern me, is the amount of traffic which will be generated, the additional traffic which will be generated by the development. The Highways Authority were concerned about the additional traffic, and they said that if the use is intensified by over 50 movements per day, a stage 1 safety audit is required. The applicant says that there won't be any increase in traffic from the events that take place. So the increase in traffic will very much depend on how much traffic is generated from use of the stables. And the operational use of the stables is rather unclear. In some documents, it describes it as being for livery purposes, sometimes for rental to a single rider, professional rider. But the Highways Authority does recommend very sensibly that there should be a condition to restrict the use of the stables to limit the traffic. And they have made a suggestion, but what we have in our condition that is in our papers is regulatory condition 12, which simply says the development proposed shall be used only as commercial stabling. Now, with great respect, that really doesn't deal with the issue of highway safety, because using it for commercial purposes could mean every single stable is let out, and that's 24 stables, let out individually to different people commercially, and they would all be coming onto the site with all the traffic that would generate. So I think there does need to be some more thought put in to a condition which, as recommended by the Highway Authority, will be in the interests of highway safety and limiting the intensification of traffic. So I am concerned about these loose ends, and at the very least, I think this should be deferred for further consideration. At the moment, I'm uneasy about supporting the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Do officers wish to comment to those views?
I would say, in terms of the impact on the amenity and of the use of the rights of way, that has been addressed in the report. It is something that our landscape officer will always take into consideration, because she's looking at the use of those public footpaths and how development will affect the users of that footpath. And she's happy that the equestrian use is an appropriate countryside use, and that that will not detrimentally affect the users of the footpath in terms of their enjoyment of the countryside. But yeah, I mean, that is a subjective opinion, but I would say that you walk, when you take a walk, you do see these buildings and they add interest to your walk, in my opinion. That's what I would say. In terms of the parking, it does include a large car park, which currently there's only park on the grass from what I could see from pictures. So this will be an established car park of 36 spaces, which are for horse boxes. And so the Highways Authority are satisfied that that's appropriate. With the condition, we try not to limit the use of the, when we try and limit these uses for these equestrian uses, we always become a bit unstuck, to be honest. That's why the condition is only said related to a commercial use instead of a private use, because when we start trying to limit these, to put these very stringent conditions on these equestrian uses, it always comes back to bite us, to be honest, and it always leads to problems. But we can look at that and try and tidy that up a bit more in consultation with the highways if considered appropriate. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor John, if I can just add here, obviously I've listened to the debate and the concerns from members. I think many of the concerns that have been raised are not insurmountable and could be addressed through perhaps small tweaks to the scheme and further consultation and additional information. Obviously there are some considerations in terms of the general mass of the building, etc., which officers consider acceptable, but if the main concerns of members were those such as parking, the public footpath, and lighting, and traffic generation. I think we could consider those further, perhaps through a deferral, but obviously that's for members to put forward motions or obviously vote on that as printed. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, there's been quite a bit of debate there about transport, but I think most members are well aware that if highways say no objection, really it is not possible to overturn normally on a highways matter where they are supportive. And I think the other thing that the head of development mentioned, which has not been probably highlighted enough, is the fact that this would have a positive impact on the rural economy, and all of us wish to see more employment opportunities in our various villages. Right, we've got quite a few speakers, so I think we'll probably keep it to those. Councillor Noel, Jupp, Vickers, Lloyd and Croker, and we'll stop it there because we had quite a good debate. So I'll take Councillor Noel first.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I would support Councillor Clark and Councillor van der Kloot totally in what they say. My concern is the proximity of the South Downs National Park. I'm aware that I've read through the proposal, I've read through all the notes associated with it. I haven't had a chance to visit it, but we were told in the introduction it was only 1 kilometre away. We have to somehow draw a gradual staging of buildings as we progress further away from the South Downs National Park. The National Park has got to remain protected, and any interference and contagion from light or from large buildings is going to interfere with this gorgeous asset that we have running along the south of the district. I do believe that having more buildings, I mean, it's been mentioned that there's an existing barn and that this new building will somehow make the barn look more attractive, but more buildings are not necessarily good. However you construct them or however beautiful you make them look, they're still going to be close to National Park. So I think by virtue of its design, it's going to stand out even more. I think it's a lovely design. I think placed elsewhere, I'd love it, but I'm concerned about this gradual encroachment upon our protected areas. And as I said, more is not going to be good. So I think I'm going to decide to vote against this one, but I shall listen to the other councillors' views first. So thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, if the councillors now about to speak can rather now confine themselves to anything new, because we've obviously covered this area in quite a bit of depth. So we'll now call for Councillor Jupp.
Thank you, Chairman. I put up my hand at a very early stage because I was very impressed with Councillor Clark's analysis of the situation. As usual, he provides a very forensic detail on the matters of important to us. I'm very happy to support his, if he was to make a proposal to defer this decision, but I think I might be lost in the rush to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Jupp. Councillor Vickers, Cabinet Member for Planning.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. I think everything's been said now you've got round to me, but just to say that I don't dispute the appropriateness of the equestrian facilities in this site, and I actually like the design of it, but there are a number of concerns that have been very well expressed by the local members, which I think we need to resolve. The parking, the lighting, and the proximity of the horse walk to the footpath. So I would be happy to second Councillor van der Kloek's proposal to defer this. I think we can overcome those concerns with appropriate conditions, and I suggest that's what we do. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lloyd. Sorry, did I see, have you disappeared? All right.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. No, I actually had withdrawn my hand because really everything has been said. Okay. And I concur with what Councillor Vickers has just said, that I would be happy to support the deferment.
Thank you. Councillor Croker.
Yes, I'd be happy to support deferment as well. I think my fellow ward member said it all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Head of Development, suggestion how we go forward now?
There's been some discussion about a deferral, but that motion would need to be formally put forward and seconded if we were to vote on that. Thank you.
So we vote on a deferral motion first before, and therefore ignore the recommendation.
If a deferral is put forward and seconded, then we go to that vote. We go to the deferral vote rather than the vote in the report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clark, I presume you would like to make a proposal here?
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to propose that we defer this application for, I'm not sure, 1 or 2 periods to clarify my concerns and the ones of my fellow councillors. So I would propose that we defer the application. I leave it to the head of development to come forward with a time span.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Yes, I'll second that.
Councillor van der Kloek has seconded. Thank you. Can we now go to a vote? And the vote is to defer this application.
Councillor Donnelly, before we go to that vote, can we just clarify why we are deferring it? As I understand it, but please do correct me if I'm wrong, we are deferring the item to further consider and seek further comments on the impact on the public footpath, the impact on the South Downs National Park Dark Skies Reserve, and the impact on parking and traffic generation. Please, could you?
Yes, could Councillor Clark advise if there's anything left out?
I think, could you repeat what you just said, please, again, especially the first part?
I have to remember to further consider and consult on the impact of the public footpath, the impact on the
public footpath.
Yeah, the amenity and the proximity to the public footpath, the impact on the South Downs Dark Skies Reserve, the impact on traffic generation and parking at the site.
That's correct. Thank you.
Right. The proposer and seconder agree with that motion. Are we all happy with the motion now? And if that is the case, can we now go to a roll call vote?
Sorry, can I just add that I think Councillor Blackhole picked up a phone call earlier when Jason was speaking, and when the first speaker was also speaking. It was quite brief, but he was on a phone call, so probably would have missed that part of the presentation. So I would just advise that he abstain from the voting, if that's okay.
Okay, Councillor Blackhole.
Yes.
Right. Okay. We now vote.
Here's the roll call for the deferment for the reasons as just confirmed with Councillor Clark. Councillor Blackhole.
Abstain.
Councillor Circus. Councillor Circus.
He may have left. I know he did have another meeting. Oh no, there he is.
For the deferral, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Croker.
For.
Councillor Dorr.
For.
Councillor Donnelly.
For.
Councillor Jupp.
For.
Councillor Lambert.
For.
Councillor Lloyd.
For.
Councillor Morgan.
For.
Councillor Noel.
For.
Councillor Platt.
For.
Councillor Potts.
For.
Councillor Rowbottom.
For.
Councillor Sanson.
For.
Councillor Vanderkloot.
For.
Councillor Vickers.
For.
Councillor Wright.
For.
So that was 17 for and 1 abstention, so the item is deferred.
Thank you very much. We will now move on to agenda item 8, if the officers would like to introduce it.
Okay, right. Bear with me.
Just two things.
Okay, so this is an application for a garage block, Blackstone Rise. It's an outline application for the demolition of an existing garage block and the construction of 3 houses. All matters reserved except access. So here we see the location plan of the garage block. There are 8 garages located at the north end of Blackstone Rise to the north of Blackstone Village. And here we see a photo of the existing garages. And this shows the existing garages in the context of the adjacent properties on Blackstone Rise. So this is the proposed arrangement for 3 houses, which will form a terrace of 3 properties with front parking. And as amended, the scheme includes an island of landscaping to soften the appearance of the development, as you can see here. As an outline application, the appearance and exact layout of the houses will be determined through a reserve matters if the scheme is recommended for approval. And it's expected that the houses will be of the same design and comparable to the existing houses on the street, which I've just previously shown you. Whilst this is a council application, it should be noted that the houses will be market housing and not affordable. As outlined in the report, the principal development is considered in accordance with the Woodman Coat neighbourhood plan, which allows small-scale housing development on previously developed sites, which we consider to be the case. Since the main issue is really the loss of parking, the report goes into a lot of detail of this. The scheme would, 4 of the 8 garages at the moment are rented out to local people, and the remaining 4 are vacant. The garages, due to their age, are either are too small for modern cars, and only 1 is currently used for parking, and the rest are used for storage. is acknowledged that there is adult parking in front of the garages, but this is not a formal arrangement which has been agreed. It's something that is just has been the benefit of the locals. So overall, the county and the officer are satisfied the approval is appropriate in terms of loss of parking and the parking for the houses. So it's also considered appropriate in all other planning matters and is recommended for approval in accordance with the adult parking in front of the garages, but this is not a formal arrangement which has been agreed.
Thank you for the dual tone approach. We have 4 public speakers all objecting to this, 3 from the public and 1 from the parish council. So therefore, could we please start with Roger Richards?
Mr. Richards, you're welcome to start when you're ready.
Has he been unmuted?
He was in a second ago. I think he's disappeared again.
Okay, we'll give him a chance to speak if he comes back before we finish this sector. So could you then go on to Isabel Woods, which is a video, and she is an objector.
I am a resident of Northview Cottages, Blackstone Lane, Isabel Woods. As a resident of Northview Cottages in Blackstone Lane, I would like to strongly object to these proposals because parking is very limited here, and in case you don't know, there are 6 individual cottages which are off the road, Northview Cottages, which all need to park in the lane as well as the Blackstone Rise residents. Most households are 2 cars, especially in rural areas. And even if 1 more parking space was needed to be found, there would be nowhere safely to park. Parking is at its maximum capacity now. As it is, we often need to park down the lane outside the Blackstone Rise houses due to the blind corner. We can't go back. We can't park backwards. We have to go forwards down the lane. These proposals do not propose to replace the parking spaces lost, which puts us residents in the position of nowhere to park and potentially putting our vehicles and the people in the cars in danger due to being forced to park dangerously. When it is dark, it is too dark to make a child or an elderly person or anybody else walk far down the road in order to access their property. There are 3 small children in Northview Cottages and more down the lane. I'd also like to know how long this would all take to complete and how the traffic will work with the big wide trucks used to deliver cement, etc. How will they be able to function and pass? How will the traffic be able to function and pass down the narrow lane? There are a lot of horses, cyclists, and us residents need to go about our daily routines, getting to work, getting to school, everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could we now have the video from objector Pam Williams?
All the objections to this planning application relate to parking in Blackstone. I expect that many of the committee will know where Blackstone is and will have driven through it on the way to somewhere else. But I wonder how many of you have actually stopped, parked your car, if you could find somewhere, and walked through it. It is a beautiful, peaceful and unique rural hamlet with no church, pub, school or shop. Most of Blackstone is in a conservation area and has many listed buildings. We are quite cheap to maintain as we have no street lights, pavements or bus routes, but we do need somewhere to park. In the early 60s, the then current district council acquired land on which to build garages, as there was obviously a need after they had built 8 more houses in Blackstone Rise. Presumably the residents of Northview, who have no direct road access, parked on Blackstone Rise before these houses were built. Why now, when the need for parking is so much greater, is the present district council planning not only to sell this land, but actually increase the problem by adding 3 more properties? When we bought our house in 2006, the demographic was quite different. There were no parking issues, but over the years houses have been bought by younger couples, each needing a car to get to work. Naturally, babies followed, then school children. but unfortunately the school bus stopped coming about 6 years ago as it couldn't get through due to parked cars. At least 3 of these children now have their own cars as they can't afford to leave home, and no one can be expected to walk well over a mile along a lane with no pavements or street lighting to catch the bus. I am asking this committee to consider the safety and over the small financial gain that the sale of this site could bring. Please do not be negligent in your duty of care to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we now have Councillor Craig Dixon from Woodmancote PC? He's objecting and he will have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to start by looking at Woodmancote's Neighbourhood Plan Policy Number 2, which supports windfall housing of 5 or fewer dwellings as long as they don't harm amenities or result in unsuitable access. The Neighbourhood Plan in point 5.21 specifically discusses the site of the proposed development and states that Policy 2 would only support development as long as the existing parking facilities are retained or increased at the site. I am therefore sorry to say that point 611 in the committee's briefing papers and the statement made by the planning officer at the start is incorrect. With respect to Horsham's own planning policy, this application is contrary to Framework Policy 4.3, which requires enhancement of community facility and services. This is a policy that appears to have been overlooked in the committee's briefing papers. The application is also contrary to Horsham's policies 39.1 and 39.3, which refer to the requirement of existing infrastructure to support development or require that suitable mitigation is attached to the planning permission. The application makes no such provision. Policy 39 also appears to have been overlooked in the committee's briefing papers. This application is also contrary to Horsham's policies 40.1 and 40.5, sustainable transport. Blackstone has no public transport, and the only mode of transportation available is the car. And the infrastructure in Blackstone already does not support this mode of transportation due to the lack of parking. This is a situation that would actually be made worse should this application proceed. Policy 40 is again a policy that has been overlooked when preparing the committee's papers. Horsham's Policy 33.2 development principle states that the development must be designed to avoid unacceptable harm to the amenity of occupiers of nearby properties. Another policy that this proposal is contrary to and has been omitted from the committee's briefing papers. I was, however, pleased to read that the committee's papers highlight this application is contrary to Horsham's Policy 41.3, which states that alternative parking provision has to be secured. This application has no plans for suitable alternative parking provision and no measures in place to mitigate against the impact. I would like the committee to note the decision for planning application DC 181138, the site of which is also on Blackstone Lane. This application was for demolition of existing outbuildings and erection of a 2-storey dwelling with associated parking. When this application was refused, it was noted that the location is not in a sustainable area and is contrary to policies 1, 2, 3, 4 and 26 of Horsham District Planning Framework. We are, of course, in a slightly unusual situation today in the fact that both the applicant and the decision maker are Horsham District Council, but I am sure the committee will uphold the same standards and policies that it would to any other applicant. Finally, with respect to the National Planning Policy Framework, this planning application is contrary to paragraph 102 points C and D with respect to transport issues. Back to the site. There are 8 garages on the site, of which only 4 are rented. Residents have tried to rent the 4 empty garages on numerous occasions, but have been declined by Horsham District Council. So please do not take the empty units to be a sign that the site is not used and not in demand. Nothing could be further from the truth. Whilst the garages themselves are narrow, at least 2 cars do park in them, and the land adjacent to the garages is used for parking by residents of Blackstone Rise, Northview and the street, all of which lack parking facilities. I would also like to highlight point 6.21 in the committee's briefing papers, which states that there is no agreement for residents to park their car at the proposed site. I actually have in my hand a letter from John Loxley from Horsham District Council Estate Management dated the 6th of May 2011, which was sent to the residents of numbers 1 to 8 on Blackstone Rise and the leaseholders of the garages, which states, and I quote, "The council has no objection to cars using the adjacent land on a first-come, first-served basis on the understanding that access to these garages is not restricted at any time. There is clearly a formal agreement in place between the residents of Blackstone and Horsham District Council, which has been in place for almost 10 years, which sets a legal precedent. Despite all these points, if the committee is minded to approve the application, I would like to highlight that the committee would be required to impose a Grampian condition on the outline planning. Failure to attach a Grampian condition that requires alternative parking provision to be provided before the ground is broken would render the legal basis for any planning permission to be unsound, as the planning permission wouldn't comply with the Neighbourhood Planning Act of 2017 and will therefore be open to legal challenge. I would like to thank the committee and the chairman for their due consideration, and I am sure that you will make the right decision for both Horsham District Council, the parish of Woodmancote and the residents of Blackstone, and decline this application. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. I see we have a Richards here, but it's not Roger Richards. He's now, oh, he is. He has changed his name. It was the wrong name up there. Right, Mr. Richards, lovely to see you now. Would you like to speak for 2 minutes?
Good afternoon. Apologies for the name confusion. I submit that this application should be rejected because it contravenes HDPF policies 4, 26 and 41 and the Woodmancote Neighbourhood Plan Policy 2. I'd like to make 2 points about the Head of Development's report, and I make no apologies for repeating some of the points that have been made earlier by others. Firstly, the report's conclusion in paragraph 641 actually recognises that the proposal conflicts with HDPF policies 4 and 26. Then, to justify overriding these policy considerations, it states that the development would accord with the principles of the neighbourhood plan, but it doesn't. The neighbourhood plan makes specific reference to the garages site. It says that policy 2 would support development proposals for this site as long as the existing parking facilities are retained or increased. The current proposal leads to a loss of parking spaces and so is actually in direct contravention of the neighbourhood plan and incidentally of HDPF policy 41. Secondly, the conclusion in paragraph 642 seeks to justify the breach of policy 41 by stating that the increase in overspill parking would not cause any harmful impacts. But there is a dire shortage of parking in Blackstone, which is a rural hamlet where a car is essential. It's on a single narrow lane. There are no pavements or streetlights. So the further away from their homes that residents are forced to park, the greater the discomfort and the danger during dark winter evenings. This is why the parking issue is so important and must not be treated lightly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would officers wish to comment at this stage? And probably most members would like to hear their view on Councillor Dixon's reference to a Grampian condition.
Sorry, if I could say that. It should be noted that these 3 houses would be subject to sill payments. So those sill payments, as the councillors know, would go, some of that would go towards the parish, which has a neighbourhood plan in place, and go towards infrastructure improvements. So that's so it's not true to say that there'd be no community benefit, because with the sill payments that you'd get those community benefits. And so I think with the principle, I think the report goes into a lot of detail that it is contrary to the local plan as in the way that it's outside the boundary, but then the neighbourhood plan is also part of the development framework. And it is on that basis that we've decided that the principle is acceptable. And we've gone through policy 2 for the housing windfall sites, and we think it meets that criteria. And we also think that the parking is a consideration. It was the main reason that people objected. And it's always an issue, as the councillors know, for most sites. And I think that that's been gone into a lot of detail in the report, and there's been a survey report. And so I think that's been looked at in a lot of detail. And yes, some of them will lose that ad hoc parking, which they currently benefit from. But then you've got to look at the overall benefits of having the 3 houses here and the benefits that will give to the council in terms of SIL contributions. Okay, thank you.
Right, we'll go to, sorry, do you want to speak here to development?
I just wanted to comment on the Grampian condition comment. Just to say, in my view, it wouldn't be reasonable to impose such a condition because you couldn't provide the development and re-provide the parking within the site. It's not possible. You would be imposing a condition on that, therefore you couldn't either build the development you have permission for or re-provide the parking. And I think it's important to note that, and it has been mentioned that the size of the garages are small, and whilst you may be able to get a very small or perhaps a vintage car in there, you couldn't fit a modern car in there, and they don't meet modern standards. So it's difficult to justify it as the loss of the garages for parking when effectively they don't meet current standards. And in terms of parking elsewhere on the site, it is ad hoc, it's not a public car park. And whilst the council, as the applicant, may have agreed that there can be some ad hoc parking on there, it is not a public car park as such. And so therefore it's difficult to justify that as the loss of spaces in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to the two local ward members. Councillor
Chairman, may I just make a point of order, please?
Yeah, sure.
I wasn't aware that Pam Williams was a speaker, and I just wanted to say that I therefore would declare a personal interest because I do happen to know her. Thank you.
Does this make you need to recluse? Or
no, we are not close friends.
Okay.
I just happen to know her.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for notifying us, Councillor Noel.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I obviously know the parish councillors, but again, I'm not close friends with any of them. So apart from my wife, of course. So I hope you don't think that I'm too influenced by them. However, I am actually in broad support of this application in terms of the housing, which is needed in this area, and it's needed everywhere. So I'm not going to argue against the housing there, but I would ask that the committee consider that some form of condition, and I don't know if it's can be a Grampian or not, must be attached to this application to provide parking for the village. Additional, which will be required if these houses are built without any parking that is currently there. It's already been demonstrated that there's not only a requirement, but to continue without any parking may well be disastrous for the village of Blackstone. We have just briefly dealt with the fact that the Parish Council hasn't requested any Section 106 or SIL monies, but I take it that will come along later when a full application is made. So I won't harp on about that. But explain my position on the parking situation as well. And to repeat briefly the chair of Woodmancote Parish Council, Section 5.2 of the Neighbourhood Plan does specify sustainability in this conservation area of Blackstone, which inter alia must include the provision and control of any parking. Approval of this application without this condition will directly affect the character of the village by increased parking, however minimal, on the only road through this settlement. In the evenings and weekends, there is already a continuous line of vehicles parked along Blackstone Lane in front of Blackstone Rise at the northern end of where these garages are positioned. And any increase in vehicles will result in dangerous congestion, with residents forced to park on the rural verges further up the lane without any lighting or pavements, and which could result in unnecessary accidents. This is in direct contravention of the spirit of Policy 1 of the Neighbourhood Plan, and it therefore argues against the officer's recommendation, who have used this policy as supporting evidence.
As already stated by the Parish Council Chairman, the neighbourhood plan specifies that amenities of the village properties must be continued and not result in any restricted access. I'm not going to waste the committee's time by repeating the objections already heard, but I feel that there is an important principle of community well-being made here, which is being seriously undermined by this application. I would ask members and officers to look at page 62 in their bundle, second paragraph, as there clearly would be an increase in on-street parking demand, particularly as there is not only the occupied garages to consider, but the other cars who also use this site with the implicit permission of the District Council. I refer back to the letter alluded to by the Parish Chairman, which was sent by our council in 2011 to residents, which says the council has no objection to cars using the adjacent land for parking on a first come, first served basis. This is the adjacent land which is shown to the west of the garages on the site plan on page 75. The use of this land for parking has existed for well over 7 years and could therefore be argued as being permitted development under planning regulations, or just permitted. To refer back to the bottom of page 64 and the top of page 65 in our bundles, the officers note the neighbourhood plan would only allow for this development as long as the existing parking facilities are retained or increased. Although our district council is attempting to defend its position by claiming that only 2 garages, in fact, they mentioned only 1 garage, is being occupied by cars, it's failed to take into account, and incidentally, I've seen 2 cars in these garages, so I know there's at least 2. It's failed to take into account that this site is clearly used as a regular parking space by a number of villagers, therefore causing much more than the stated minor increase in on-street parking. However, I feel the principle I just referred to earlier is that this application has decided to override the concerns of the residents that I represent at this council. I know that the officers involved in this application have tried to accommodate this loss of parking, but have found no solution and therefore downplayed the resulting damage to village amenities. As I said before, I do support this application in principle, but we must all acknowledge the pressing need for housing in this location. However, the loss of parking must also be addressed. I'm therefore proposing that a condition must be attached to this application to provide the community parking spaces in addition to the ones already allocated to the development, either at the front or the back of the site. And this must be included in the approval. Otherwise, regrettably, I'll have to vote against this application. Everyone here is aware that in the near future, further pressure for possibly unsustainable building may well be imposed upon us as a planning authority. But right now, we have to demonstrate that principles of decency and consideration for our residents must be retained. To ride roughshod over this basic appeal by this village to maintain its parking amenities is surely the least we can do. If this doesn't happen, I'll have little faith in this council being able to maintain its dignity and respect under any new planning regime to come when even further pressure is heaped upon us. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. I'd start with thanking my fellow ward councillor for a fairly eloquent summary of views that I share, in fact. To save a bit of time, I won't go into some of the technical issues I've got, other than to say I think trying to use an argument that the modern penchant for bloated SUVs is a reason for saying people can't use the garages is somewhat absurd. And while I accept the need for housing, in the case of Blackstone, parking is a major problem. As I've seen by going through the village, or the hamlet rather, a lot of the cars there could actually use the garages. They are not large vehicles. So I'm minded to vote against it unless I can be persuaded otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any other members wish to comment? No other members wish to comment. Would the officers wish to make any reference to the discussion debate?
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to remind members that obviously we have to treat this application as we would any others, and I know you all appreciate that. And in that regard, you know, it is essentially private land that the council owns. It is not a public car park, and I appreciate there has been an agreement previously in terms of parking there, but the fact remains it is not a public piece of land. And in terms of the sizes of the garages, I do appreciate that the comment that was made, and technically you could get a small car in those garages. The reference to sizes is with regard to the county parking standards, which we use with it in Horsham, and it's generally recognised that there are certain space standards in terms of a parking space, and if an area doesn't meet those, then it is difficult to justify it as a parking space in that regard. If I could just ask my colleague Jason to bring up the site plan for me, please. Thank you. Oh, sorry, could you bring up the block, sorry, I used the wrong terminology. Can you bring up the site layout? Next one. This one, yeah, sorry. So this is obviously the suggested site layout, and this is where my concerns raise in terms of any form of Grampian condition. This is a suggested way in which the development can come forward. You know, if a Grampian condition were imposed to re-provide parking on the site, where would it go? In my view, you could not deliver the development and re-provide the parking, and in my view such a condition would not meet the 6 condition tests which all conditions need to meet. It's not reasonable and necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms, and that's what members must consider in their assessment. Thank you.
Thank you. So no more members wish to speak, and in the circumstances we would go to the vote. Oh, one hand's up. Councillor Lloyd.
Thank you, Chair. It was only a brief thing. I just, because there seems to be a legal issue here, I just wondered whether the monitoring officer could perhaps guide us on this as to whether they are parking there by right or of right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd, and thank you, Chairman. As the head of development has already explained, the land is such that it's private land, so it's not a public, although it is owned by the council, it's not a public car park. And agreement for ad hoc parking has been given, and therefore the occupying has been, and the use of that car park has been with permission. So no prescriptive rights have been realised, even though I think one of the objectors stated, I think it was the parish council, that it had been going on for 10 years. It's formalising an agreement, and therefore there is no legal basis. Permission has been given on an ad hoc, first come, first come basis, and there are no rights that are able to be realised. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And as I said during the last application, we have great problems where highways have had no objection to applications on parking grounds when we overturn the application, because so often we then lose at appeal with costs. It's one of those unfortunate things. Right. To the vote, please, Democratic Services.
Right, okay, so this is, the recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to the appropriate conditions.
Sorry, I was just going to mention it again with regards to the voting. I think I just wanted to confirm if Councillor Lloyd and Councillor
Yes.
if they were present throughout and were able to hear, because I think you left briefly, but came back to your seats. So just checking if you were able to hear throughout.
Can I declare that
Which one?
Sorry, it was
Which one left our seat?
It was Councillor Circus and Councillor
Yes,
Stanton.
I did. We've got somebody replacing doors here, so I'm very sorry I had to leave to deal with that, and so I wasn't present for the whole of the meeting, and I will not be voting.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Stanton?
Sorry, when did I disappear?
It was only briefly, just at the start of the presentation. So just wanted to check if you were able to hear throughout. You might have just gone to get something and come back.
No, I was in the room just moving some bookcase.
Okay, yeah. So just wanted to confirm that you were able to hear throughout so you could participate in the vote. Yeah.
May I declare, it's Kate Rowbottom here, may I declare that I actually answered the phone twice in that?
Oh, right, sorry, I missed you there. Apologies for that.
Yeah,
thanks
so
for being honest.
As well.
Thanks for being honest. Thank you.
Right. Have anyone left to vote now? Can we now go to the vote? No more people sneaking in and out.
Okay.
Right.
Right. Are we ready for the roll call to grant?
Apparently so, yeah.
Councillor Blackhole.
For.
Councillor Circus, you said you were going to.
Not voting.
Yes. Councillor Clark.
Abstain.
Councillor Croker.
Against.
Councillor Daw.
Abstain.
Councillor Donnelly.
For.
Councillor Jupp.
For.
Councillor Lambert.
For.
Councillor Lloyd.
For.
Councillor Morgan.
Against.
Against, yeah. Councillor Noel.
Against.
Councillor Platt.
Against.
Councillor Potts.
Against.
Councillor Rowbottom, you said you would abstain. Councillor Sampson.
For.
Councillor Vanderploot.
For.
Councillor Vickers.
For.
Councillor Wright.
For.
So that was 9 votes for, 5 votes against, and 4 abstentions. So the motion is carried.
Thank you. The motion is carried. We now move on to agenda item 9. If the officers would like to lead. And there are no speakers for this item. No public speakers, that is.
Okay, so come to the final item. Bear with me. Okay, so this is Old Dairy East Cottage, which is just up the road from where we just were. Okay. So you can see the site here. The site is in a countryside location to the east of Benfield and north of Blackstone Lane. That's an application by an HDC employee, hence it's the reason why I had to come to committee. The site relates to a dwelling which forms a cluster of properties that includes ancillary stables, which you can see here on the left. On the right is the proposal. Proposal is to convert the property, the stables on the property into holiday accommodation and also construct a new stables. So here we see the aerial photograph. As you can see here, there's plenty of parking here, so parking is not an issue here. This is the proposed layout plan. So you can see the 2 proposed buildings in the highlighted here. So you've got the longer, more L-shaped buildings, which is a part conversion of an existing stables into holiday accommodation. And then you've got the squarer building next to it, which is a stable buildings for private use of the dwelling. And this is a photo showing the existing stables on site, which is to be converted. Here we see the proposed stable block, which is the square building, single story building. And here we see the elevations of the and layout plan of the holiday accommodation adjacent to it. Oh. So, hold on. So we say there is ample parking on site to accommodate the use, because I saw that that was an issue raised by the parish. And overall, the scheme is considered visually appropriate and accepted development in the countryside, which will encourage tourism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As I said, there are no speakers registered. So can we now go on to the two ward members? Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm quite happy to accept this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Noel.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I haven't got a lot to say about this because it did go in front of the parish council, I remember, because both Mark and I obviously sit on the parish council. Sorry, Councillor Croker and Mark and I sit on the parish council. We've been through all this and the parish council are quite happy with it. The only reason it's here is because the East Cottage is owned by a council employee, and therefore I will agree to this without any further comment. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Noel. Do any members wish to speak? No members wish to speak, and I presume the officers do not want to comment on the non-speaking situation. So if everybody's happy, we'll go to the vote. Everybody looks happy. So Democratic Services, over to you.
Right, so this is the recommendation to grant planning permission subject to appropriate conditions. Councillor Blackhole.
For.
Councillor Circus.
For.
Councillor Clark. Councillor Clark. I'll come back to you. Councillor Croker.
For.
Councillor Daw.
For.
Councillor Donnelly.
For.
Councillor Jupp.
For.
Councillor Lambert.
For.
Councillor Lloyd.
For.
Councillor Morgan.
For.
Councillor Noel.
For.
Councillor Platt.
For.
Councillor Potts.
For.
Councillor Rowbottom.
For.
Councillor Sanson.
For.
Councillor Vanderkloot.
For.
Councillor Vickers.
For.
Councillor Wright.
For.
And Councillor Clark. Well, he's met have lost him, yes, but that was unanimous in favour of the recommendation.
20-0. That is then carried. Thank you very much. Item 10 is urgent business. There is no urgent business, so I would like to thank you all for attending and thank the officers for running what sometimes can be very difficult meetings over Zoom. Touch wood, it seemed to go not too badly. I will not discuss the decisions with Councillor Noel. Right. Thank you very much. And
thank you, Chair.
All have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Chairman.